So the way that we've set this up is we're going to hear first from two urban planning and economic development experts, and then we're going to have a panel, sort of have a discussion. So our first expert is Dan Zach. If you are from Fresno, you probably know Dan. Dan is an urban planner and urban designer and all things downtown savant. And he was the assistant planning director for the city of Fresno. He also held senior roles for the city of Redwood City in the Bay Area. Whenever I have a downtown question, I call Dan or text Dan, and he always responds with maybe 6 more texts to give me things I didn't know I needed to know. Exactly. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Donnie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to beautiful downtown Fresno, the beautiful Sun Stereo warehouse. So I am going to attempt to get through 152 years of urban development history in 7 minutes. Thank you, excellent. So bear with me, but I want to set the table for kind of where we were and how we got where we are today, and then a sneak peek into some of the things that will hopefully be coming up in the future. So we started out in 1872, if you don't know, as a train stop on the Central Pacific Railroad. Fresno was founded by Leland Stanford University, one of the big 4 rail tycoons in the 1800s. And we started out as a very humble little Wild West town. This is looking from the train station at Mariposa and H Street east to the courthouse in about 1880. By the 1890s, this is what had evolved in that short period of time. This incredible, dynamic Victorian business district had just sprung up out of nowhere, basically. It was unbelievable what these guys were able to create in the desert, walkable, vibrant urban community. And by the 1920s, we had evolved even more. We were building high-rises. The center of commerce had shifted to Fulton Street, which is still considered the main street to this day. And it was really there because 50 miles of streetcar tracks converged from every corner of the city, all the way out as far as Kings Canyon and Clovis Avenue to the east, and all the way up to the San Joaquin River in the north. And they all converged, all of those lines converged on Fulton Street. And so there was a huge building boom of high-rises from 1912 to 1924, and those are still a lot of our greatest landmark buildings to this day. The amount of pedestrians that you could find on a random street corner on a random afternoon in downtown Fresno in the 1920s and 30s was unbelievable. We think of, big cities is where you have to go to get this kind of street life these days, but as a town of 40,000 people, that's what we had in little old downtown Fresno. But after a decade and a half of depression and war, America came back from all that in the mood to sprawl. And we were going to build suburbs now. And Fresno said, sign me up. We're all in on suburbia. And so Fresno went crazy with it. For the first decade or so, it was mainly residential, and everybody was good with that. Okay, yeah, young families coming back from the war, they want their house with their yard, it's all good. And then by the late 50s, commerce was leaking out of downtown, and the city fathers were not cool with that. In fact, they freaked out. They had an epic meltdown. This is Manchester Center, Shields and Blackstone. This is what it looked like in the late 50s. They looked at this and they said, this is the future, this is the dream, this is gonna murder our downtown if we don't emulate it. Look at all that free parking right in front. So they looked at this, which was actually still doing pretty well in the 1950s, downtown Fresno. Look at all those businesses, pedestrians, and they said, this is doomed to fail. We see the writing on the wall, we're gonna save it. Now, keep in mind, if we had this number of pedestrians on the sidewalks right now, all of us urban planners would be doing high fives, slapping each other on the back, but they panicked. They freaked out, they thought it was dying, and so they decided to save downtown Fresno by tearing it down. And they were ruthless. They spared no prisoners. They didn't hold back at all. The destruction was comprehensive, thorough. We're frankly lucky that we have anything left. We threw away buildings that were better than what most towns have at all, and we just threw them away. And this is just a sampling of the buildings we had. This is Broadway. Now, in a lot of towns, this would have been the best street. Fresno is like our number 5 street. But this is what it looked like in the before times, and this is what the same view looks like today. This is our Chinatown neighborhood, a dense, vibrant, multicultural neighborhood. This is the same area today, after year of failed redevelopment concepts. We were so ruthless, we tore down our first city hall for a parking lot. We tore down our library built by our funds from Andrew Carnegie. Tore it down. We even did the unthinkable and tore down the county courthouse, the symbol of Fresno, got rid of it in our quest to be modern, drive-in, suburbia style downtown. We took out the main street itself in an attempt to emulate suburbia and put in a car-free pedestrian mall, second in the country out of 200 that were originally built eventually. And it was picturesque, it was very tranquil. It could have worked, but within 5 years, the city was allowing major retailers to leak out to the next mall, and the leak continued and all the way up until the 90s or 2000s when we hit the river with even more shopping centers, more subdivisions, and all that investment was going to the edge of the community, not into our established neighborhoods, which were being disinvested and declining because of lack of resources. Our downtown continued to struggle, and even after a while, the sprawl got so far out, first and second ring suburbs started to suffer. The mighty Manchester, which was the future, soon had to go through a massive revitalization effort due to massive vacancy numbers. And so the sprawl kept going farther and farther and taking even suburban vitality with it from old suburbs. Meanwhile, across the US, a lot of young people and other groups are deciding in the late 90s, 2000s, hey, downtown's actually kind of cool, let's move back there. And so a lot of cities started coming back, and this was a big opportunity for Fresno. This is kind of how it went, if you like memes. I have 2 teenagers, so I have to use memes. So Fresno rewrote its entire general plan, rewrote its development code, rezoned the whole city to be as infill friendly as possible, and to create a downtown that was a live, work, play kind of downtown like it used to be, and like the good ones still are across the country, instead of just the purely commercial downtown that our city fathers envisioned in the 1950s and 60s. And so downtown now has the capacity in its zoning to allow up to 75,000 homes downtown. And so the goal for the mayor is to get 10,000 people living downtown within a decade or so. We've had about 700 homes built downtown in the last decade and a half. They're very popular, doing really well, and we have more on the way. We've also been successful at partnering with the state, getting funds for housing supportive infrastructure in downtown to help spur even more downtown housing construction. There's been successful efforts at getting federal funds to support an ag-centered tech sector to grow in downtown Fresno, centered on historic buildings. And despite a decline during COVID, which all downtowns suffered, Fresno's actually come back a little quicker than other downtowns. So based on a study from University of Toronto, we're at about 120% of our pre-COVID activity in terms of number of people circulating through our downtown, whereas downtowns like San Francisco are struggling in the 30, 40, 50% range. And so we've been able to bounce back. It's still not good enough. We still all want more, but we're fighting like hell and we're seeing results. And then finally, there's live, work, and then play is the last bit of it. And so we've been really successful and fortunate to get a thriving brewery scene downtown and to get other entertainment uses and to partner with folks like Downtown Fresno Partnership to get special events to draw people down and get them acquainted with the area and get them attached to it and having fun and supporting businesses. And so that is a good way to populate the place until the residential density gets where it needs to be. And then finally, someday we'll have a high-speed rail station that connects to other parts of California. Now, when you get off of that, you won't see the downtown of 1900 that they saw when they got off of the train back then. You won't see the downtown of today. But if we keep fighting like hell, we might just see a future Fresno that is thriving and successful in its own way. And that's what a lot of us in our own ways are trying to get to. So there you go, 152 years and hopefully 7 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dan. Joe, do you want to introduce our Sacramento speaker?
As you can tell, Darlene is ready. So, as I mentioned earlier, we had this idea of bringing together an exchange between Sacramento and Fresno. And as I started to do research and saw the parallels, I said, I've got to call Darlene, because Darlene's one of the few people who is, as a consultant and as an economics professor at George Mason University, has studied what was going on in Fresno with the DRIVE initiative, with a grant from the Pew Foundation. But at the same time, she had been called upon by the current mayor of Sacramento to launch an inclusive economic development strategy process called Project Prosper. And so again, today we saw some of these parallels between Project Prosper and the DRIVE initiative that CVCF has been coordinating. But Darlene really helped us pull the right people from Sacramento to spend some time today with their counterparts here in Fresno. So Darlene, come up and give us the context for Sacramento.
Sacramento story. All right.
There you go.
Which one? All right. Earlier I did it the wrong way, so. Okay. Well, I am really excited to be here tonight because two reasons. One, I pretty much had my youth here. My family spent over 50 years here. My parents actually went to Fresno City College. My dad played football there. And I spent a lot of summers in my grandmother's pool and a lot of time roaming Fashion Fair. Sorry, it was out there. But I think that it's really also, the second reason is it's exciting for me to be able to share a project that was really challenging and very fulfilling. Mayor Steinberg came in 2017, and he had this vision about being able to make Sacramento better by showing us better ideas about the needs of our neighborhoods, and also how that could actually help us diversify our economy. We're a state government town, so what else could we do? I remember meeting this man here. He was the mayor's chief of staff, Mike McKeever, and he'll be joining us here tonight. And he basically asked me, was I ready to do some serious policy work? Because there was a chance for us to really change the trajectory of our city. And so a few months later, we began Project Prosper. And Project Prosper, at its core, was about really trying to see what were the needs of the neighborhoods, because our neighborhoods across the city were very different. And we needed to also understand how we could do a better job at investing in those neighborhoods in an equitable and inclusive manner. And that really became a core of Project Prosper. And when we thought about it, we needed to understand, well, if we wanted to concentrate on our residents and we wanted to concentrate on our neighborhoods, what are the core capacities that we needed to actually invest in? And that came through this idea of a place-conscious approach. We know that there are interconnections between our neighborhoods and our people and our places. There's businesses and people, they actually operate and live in different types of neighborhoods and different types of conditions, and they're just not separated, right? There's just not this corridor to that corridor to that corridor. We needed to understand how to actually make a city plan actually also able to help the neighborhoods. And so the idea is we wanted to invest in three core capacities. And that is people capacity, which is our human capital, our experience, our skills, our knowledge, and how we utilize that to actually improve our social and economic interactions in the world. Business capacity, all businesses face different types of assets, or have different types of assets, and face different types of challenges, like supply chain and equipment and facilities and workforce. And so what was the need that those businesses had in those different types of neighborhoods? And a vital component of our business capacity is understanding how innovation and entrepreneurial capacity actually fits in, and how can neighborhoods do a better job at growing these types of innovative small businesses. And finally, place capacity. We talk about this in terms of like the physical, environmental needs that a place can have, whether it's just infrastructure or placemaking, which can actually help a resident feel closer emotionally and physically to their neighborhood if they can actually enjoy and connect in that. And so all of this was about really trying to think about how these types of basic core investments done in an equitable and inclusive manner could help us diversify our economy. So Project Prosper, a little timeline here. really, we kicked off with a lot of deep research, lots of resident interviews, lots of neighborhood resident association interviews. We also brought together a stakeholder working group that involved several national experts that came in and kind of helped us think through different types of models in different types of cities. We also then did a bunch of work in terms of actually going out with community meetings and business meetings to figure out what the needs, had charrettes about what was good in people's neighborhoods, what was not good in people's neighborhoods, and what their biggest concerns in terms of people, business, and place, and had them go through a voting exercise. We took that and we put it into a digital kit and a survey so that we could get it out more widely than just to the people who were attending our meetings. And we basically came away with kind of 3 big messages. One, that we needed to really do a better job at structuring our investments wisely around investing in people, business, and place capacities. 2, we had to do that in a more intentional manner and actually in an equitable way so that we could actually think about how those investments could generate better diversified economic growth. And 3rd, we needed to really think about how this was going to translate into engaging our community better and our neighborhoods better. Because believe me, in those interviews, I heard a lot of things about how the city does this, you never listen to us. And we have those voices, but with Project Prosper, we really tried to think about like what the needs of the neighborhoods were and what that meant in terms of what we did. And so I want to kind of just share 3 quick, there we go, kind of our principles, those 3 principles that I just stated, into our outcomes. And foremost is we really needed to think about what types of policies and which types of structures, governance structures, could actually support Project Prosper. And that really came through in kind of this kind of threefold here on this slide. We passed a resolution in the summer of 2018 that actually said, let's take a comprehensive look at growth. And we utilize the very inclusive and equitable lens to do that and really try to focus on the unique needs of our neighborhoods. The second part really came with Measure U. Measure U was a sales tax measure that was passed in 2012 to pretty much fill the gap that was being cut from our budgets during the impacts of the Great Recession. In 2018, the voters passed it to extend that sales tax, but also add another ½ cent. And of that ½ cent, the part of the idea was basically, while it was general fund money, the idea was that it was going to go to inclusive economic development, more affordable housing, and investment in youth, along with other types of city services like public safety. To support Measure U, they reconstituted the Measure U Community Advisory Committee, all these wonderful acronyms here. And they basically are representing across all the districts, and so we're able to have advice from these actual members and inform council decisions. And Marbella Sala, she joined us today. She's on the Measure U committee. Hi, Marbella, thank you for joining us. And then in 2019, we formed the Inclusive Economic Development Investment Committee. And this is a committee that actually convenes monthly and informs the different types of investment decisions for the Office of Innovation and Economic Growth. The principles to outcomes for our people capacity, I think there's so much actually here. I mean, we're learning so much about like the SCORE initiative here that Sacramento's centered on racial equity and the Racial Equity Committee. That is actually going to go before our city on April 30th, and they're going to actually look at the budget for the first time through a racial equity lens. The cross-department collaboration actually comes through our Neighborhood Development Action Team, and that brings in economic development, and community engagement, and they work together and actually provide resources to our commercial corridors and to the people that are on the ground there to figure out what are the best ways to connect them to the issues that are needed. They have award-winning programs from the Community Ambassador Program to others, and Elizabeth and Lynette are sitting right there, and they joined us today, and they are also on our Neighborhood Development Action Team, and Mikhail escaped. I don't know where he went. Okay, on business capacity, the big thing I would think is like, how many of you have ever heard of economic gardening? It's all about growing these businesses that are just right on the cusp, that could really make a difference if they had some tailor-made types of investment and technical assistance. And that might be very simple things from understanding how to better hire employees to actually figuring out a supply chain that's more regional in nature. The last one is about place, and place really is this Aggie Square Innovation District. I saw on Dan's slides the Innovation District, the inspiration from Georgia Tech. So UC Davis's president of the time is actually from Georgia Tech, and so Innovation Square was a motivation here. And so this is a public-private partnership between the city, UC Davis, and Wexford Technology. It takes place right by the UC Davis Medical Center, which is just southeast of downtown. And it's an area that's really been primed for development for a long time, but only if it's well-intentioned and well-targeted types of investment. And so the city is using two unique types of complementary financing tools and in joint with a community benefits partnership agreement. And I think the key thing here is that when we're talking about that partnership agreement, and there's still issues and they're still having meetings of who's bringing stuff to the table enough or not, but there's money there for affordable housing, there's money there for a community annual fund, improvements to the streetscapes there, and also the idea of just more affordable housing and taking on issues like gentrification. Basically, the Scale Up Sacramento Economic Action Agenda is what Project Prosper rolled up into. And we did a deeper dive. We worked with RW consultants and industry-specific strategies. You can see here, Aggie Square actually embeds each of these with the 5 cross-cutting strategies. And the idea is that we're trying to really think about moving forward in a different way and thinking about what are the assets that we have in our community. And these are strategies that was all about inclusion and how we could actually appropriately place that. So our downtown and Sacramento's equitable path forward is, it's a changing space. So I mean, coming out of the pandemic, we have seen a lot of impact of not having our state workers down there 5 days a week, homelessness and those types of issues. But I really think that, if we continue to think about neighborhoods, and downtown is really a neighborhood, this is the type of ways that we really need to think about investing through this equitable and inclusive lens. And one of the things the mayor said at each of our community meetings was that we are better off when we are all better off. And I think that that's really what we need to think about when we think about our neighborhoods and the development. And that means your downtown too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serene. Very interesting stuff going on in SAC. So I'm going to bring up my fellow panelists. So first of all, you all know our city council member, Miguel Arias. Please come and join us. Come on down. And next to Miguel, we have Reza Assemi, downtown developer extraordinaire. Extraordinaire, exactly. Elliot Balch, who is the CEO of the Downtown Fresno Partnership. Come on down, Elliot. We have Mike McKeever, who was the former chief of staff to Mayor Steinberg in Sacramento. He was the executive officer of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, which is their regional planning organization. And prior to his work at SACOG, he ran 2 planning consulting firms in Portland. Yes, so he knows all sorts of things about Portland, Sacramento, urban planner extraordinaire, now retired and gets to say whatever he wants, right? And last but not least, we have Roshan Davis. Roshan is a musician, an entrepreneur, a community developer, a developer, wherever you would like. Actually, my notes are there, so go there. And he's the co-founder of a nonprofit in Sacramento called Unsung Heroes that helps activate a lot of neighborhood spaces and bring people into community development. So welcome, Roshan. Yep.
Testing.
I want to, because you have been here since 1999. And I would love for you to talk to this group about why you first came downtown, what you saw here that not a lot of people did, and how your journey and what you've seen in the last 25 years downtown, how that's changed.
So yeah, 1999, it was a small 3,000 square foot building that I converted into artists' live, work, and show spaces. So the the idea there and the inspiration there was to create a space that an artist could live, work, and show public. So basically all three things that you need to survive, all under one roof. And as an artist also, I always thought that was the most difficult thing to find. And what attracted me to downtown, I guess to start with that part, was I always loved urban environments. And I've said this 1,000 times over all the years, but I loved downtown Fresno from that first day. It was never, it's going to get to this point, it's going to be great, or it's going to get to that point. I loved what it was then, and I also love what it is now. And a lot's changed. So when I look back and think back to living here in 2001, that's when the building opened, and I moved in, and three friends also moved in, and we started opening our doors to the public and doing art shows and things like that. It was a very different downtown. Just to put some perspective for those that are familiar here, there was no stadium. The IRS building that I like that where's Dan? Dan? That you had in that picture where that was a really ugly streetscape where it used to look cool. That wasn't there. The freeways that connect all downtown, that wasn't there either. So it was also pretty much a ghost town at night, but there was also something magical with that and beautiful in that whole experience. Where we are today is night and day. Sometimes I pinch myself and think I wouldn't have thought it would have happened this fast. So I always chuckle when someone goes, when's it going to happen? When's downtown going to come back? I go, what are you talking about? Like there's still a lot of work to do, but it's night and day. I mean, 5 years ago, this block wasn't like this, 3 years ago, this was a boarded up, abandoned building that a friend of mine, Jamin Brazil, twisted my arm and said, let's do something with that. So I think I probably diverted.
You want to tell people what this building was supposed to be at one point in the past?
In the past?
The Forest City project?
Oh, yeah, let's go there. I'm not a fan of master development and never have been. I remember years and years back, I don't know if Fresno was unique to that, probably not. It probably was going on everywhere, but everyone seemed to think that the fix to urban downtowns and city centers was let's get developers and make these master development projects, right? Which means it's really hard for someone else to come in and do something. The polar opposite of organic growth, which to me is the healthiest way to revive a community in a downtown. Let's let it happen at its own pace. Let's try to push it a little bit, but let's let it happen at its own pace organically. So there was a time when you had Forest City coming in, and I won't go through all the different people, but different developers were trying to take their piece, right, of our downtown. And Nick Jovino, who was planning director at that time, called me, and the area that I have probably focused the most on is Mural District, which is a little bit on the northern end of downtown. And he said, what are you interested in that area? I go, everything, as it comes for sale or as I can make more stuff happen. He goes, how do you feel about master developer? Because there's someone else looking at this area. I go, don't let it happen. And I don't want it either. I don't think anybody should have it. I think we as a community, and it takes, kind of takes a whole lot of people to make stuff happen. So a quick little example I always tell people is, let's look at this building. So I finished this building about 2 years ago. It's full of life. It's got an amazing feel that I couldn't have predicted. Part of it's luck, right? If this building didn't have all the people and the businesses in it that it has right now, it'd just be a really pretty empty shell and boring building, So it takes so many different facets to come together to make downtown. You got to have people who have the love and passion that want to bring old buildings back and also make new stuff, obviously, and you've got to have the businesses and the people taking a risk and wanting to open their futures also there, and also people moving downtown. So, yeah, this would have been under Forest City's plan. This would have been gone. Like actually, everything on this block would not be here. You'd see a lot of wooden stucco buildings, basically.
Council member, I want you to take us on a little bit of a historic journey for yourself. And I know you grew up in Mendota and have been traveling to downtown Fresno until you began to live here. What have you seen and observed over the years in terms of different approaches to downtown revitalization? And how do you feel like our historic obsession with mega projects has changed or not changed?
So a couple of takeaways. One is the timeline of it being a pedestrian mall and it failing as a pedestrian mall. There was like about 15, 20-year window where it was a default shopping center for Latino immigrants. Everyone in rural towns, including my hometown of Mendota, would come here, and this would be our shopping center. It was that immigrant community that sustained the pedestrian mall, even at its, bare bones for decades. It's that same community that will be gentrified and will be pushed out as the street gets reopened, as land bankers, double and triple rents before they fix anything, and as the city encourages revitalization efforts. So for us, it's a little different meaning. In that journey, we built a stadium with a 40-year mortgage, with folks committing to make sure that the stadium would never be able to be used for competitive soccer, only for baseball. Because our goal was to attract the white flight from up north back to downtown. And to not, instead of engaging with the demographic that already existed in the city, in this valley. So for us, we could only do exhibition soccer matches in that stadium, never competitive ones. Baseball has been losing us money for 20 years. The only time we sell out the stadium is when we have soccer, exhibition matches, or Spanish concerts. 18,000 people, a baseball game gets you 700 people on a good day. So as we go through this journey, from my perspective, we have to wrestle with, this notion of who do we want to be? How far back in history do we want to reach back to try and recreate that history versus embracing who we are and the future? And the future is much younger, it's much more diverse. Before being on the council, I was a downtown resident for 15 years, living, working, and playing here. A year ago, I just moved up to a tower a mile away, 6 minutes down the street. But what I've seen in my 5 years on the council is a couple of realities that continue to hold us back. One is a handful of property owners who have been land banking and continue to land bank. They're still waiting for the big payout, the big forest city, the big, government lease for 40, 50 years, the big buyout from a high-speed rail interest investor. We still have significant investment and commitment from the federal and state governments, new buildings, new workers. Unfortunately, the county has made a decision to move its workforce from the core downtown to the suburb, even though the vast majority of our public transportation infrastructure and those who use social services from the county are in this core area. They've just now made that a 2.5-hour bus ride to be able to get basic services. The city's commitment has been to try and expedite investment here through what we own, which is public infrastructure. Thankfully, the governor and the state has been generous in their investment of that. But I also want to couch that with this. When you think about the city's investment commitment to downtown, let me just share this number with you. Annually, our commitment from the general fund to downtown Fresno, it's a grand total of about $200,000 a year. That's it. That's it. And that pays for extra garbage pickup, weekly, daily cleanings on the Fulton corridor as a condition of the grant to reopen the street. There isn't much additional investment. Every other week, we give a much larger subsidy to a new spa development in the fringe of the city through waiving impact fees, waiving a bunch of stuff. Folks like Reza have succeeded in downtown in spite of the handful of land bankers, in spite of the city adding every obstacle and footing the bill to them on the 100-year-old sewer lines and water lines that we've never improved or fixed. And that success continues. Folks like Nora, who've been very thoughtful of developing the brewery district. The brewery district wasn't developed, Nora's success can be tied to the city. It's tied to individual folks who said we're going to persist and invest and succeed. Our hop wasn't the city. It was the Arts Council, the arts community saying we need to have something different. So my journey in a nutshell is we're still wrestling how to be a big city and not act like a small town.
Elliot, I have to go to you. You've been at this journey for the last 2 decades. I think longer than I've known you at this point, and now you are on the side of working with the property owners, running the P-bid, and you're in the position of having to move some folks who may have owned property for a long time, who may be holding out for the high-speed rail future payout or whatever, future dreams that they have. And so how has that journey been for you? What challenges are you seeing right now in sort of matching present reality with future ambition?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's great to go after Reza and Councilmember Arias because I feel like I've had versions of the things that you were both saying in conversations with folks who have said, when are things going to change? Well, in the brewery district, on the average Friday, Saturday night, there's 2,500 people here after 5 p.m. We can remember, when Art Hop, there wasn't anybody on the Fulton Mall, but now there's 15,000 people who are packing those sidewalks on the first Thursday of the month. So things do change, but yet we always are geared as humans to resetting what we think is normal or average to like the new today.
When will we have made it?
What?
The Apple Store?
Well, so we still, on and around Fulton, the reality is still that we have at least, depending how you count, a 65% vacancy rate in our retail. So, the other part of what's been said is true. Like, we still have work to do. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and certainly one of the things that got me interested a year plus ago in kind of re-entering downtown work full-time as this position became open, is that when we created the P-bid in 2009 and 10, there was kind of 2 conversations. One conversation was about the level of services, and so things like Miguel was mentioning, $200,000 of general fund commitment towards downtown. How can we raise the level of services? So the P-bid, as a funding mechanism, was very much focused on things that we're still doing day in and day out, week in, week out today. Clean and safe services, hospitality, marketing, event activation, bread and butter stuff. And the kind of things that don't happen unless there's a group entity because it's beyond any one property owner. And that's, again, what keeps us busy. But the other half of the conversation back then, and what I feel kind of got lost over time in how we scoped our role, was that there's more to the story when we are together in coordination as property and business owners. There's advocacy that needs to happen. There's coordination in terms of strategy. And so there's just a whole, we're set up to have collective action problems as a downtown because we have this wonderful tapestry of different ownership, which gives us the individuality of the properties and the businesses, but it also sets in front of us a challenge for how we coordinate. And if you look at retail development, and again, we've got about 500,000 square feet of retail and at least 65% of it's vacant. So think about it as a development opportunity that every owner is part of. Well, retail is very sensitive to what's around. It's not like you could take this building as the micro example, right? It's this ecosystem. It's true at any scale. It's true in greenfield development. It's true in an urban context. The context of the retail that's around really matters. So it calls for a coordinated strategy, and that's work that we really haven't set for ourselves before as an organization, but it's clearly needed in this environment.
Thanks, Elliot. Mike, I want to turn to you, and I just want to point out a little bit of an elephant in the room, I think, for some of the Fresno folks. We do not have a professional basketball team in our downtown. We do not have a state capitol. We do not have a UC Medical Center in our downtown. So what can Fresno learn from Sacramento? And has Sacramento struggled with sort of the allure of shiny objects and silver bullet projects in the past?
Well, I think there are positive and negative lessons to learn from Sacramento. We have certainly struggled with some of the similar downtown issues that I've heard described here today, including making K Street a pedestrian-only corridor, reopening it, closing it, reopening it. And it's still not, it's improving, but it's not the best part of downtown right now. So one of the things that the city really got right was the location and the design of the new basketball arena, the Golden One Center. There were many other places it could have gone and almost went because of the usual market and political forces in play in any city and any downtown. And they put it in precisely the right place, and they designed a gorgeous arena. I'm a big basketball fan. I believe it's the finest arena in the country. And they designed a retail and hotel neighborhood around it. It's a shining example of a big project done really, really well. And when there are events there, basketball games or concerts or whatnot, the area around it is alive, and it's wonderful, and it's what everyone would want in their downtown. But there isn't an event every night or every hour of every day, and so the adjacent areas are still not nearly as lively as we would want, and I'm sure you would want for your downtown. I think the dominant reason for that is lack of housing in the downtown proper. Sacramento has done really well in the last decade through relaxing zoning standards and parking requirements at building housing in the adjacent neighborhoods to the downtown. And I see some of that type of housing starting to come in here in the tour we did today. And the city has built some downtown proper housing, but it's been far too modest in the densities that it was willing to allow when those projects were approved. And so there just aren't enough residents in the downtown proper for it to be a lively space like you want it to be. We've also had a substantial homeless problem, I would say more so than at least by eye test I saw here. I'm sure you think you have a serious problem here, but we have a really serious problem. It's starting to get better in Sacramento, but we have a long ways to go. And the last thing I'll say, just focusing on this Golden One Center, and I think this tees up the next person you're going to ask a question to. The people don't want to come, there's an intrinsic link between actually attracting people who want to live in an area and what they can do in the immediate area around that. And so activating the spaces, the corridors, the blocks immediately around where you want the housing to be is critical, because people who want to live, not everybody wants to live an urban lifestyle, but many do. And one of the main reasons they like it is not what's inside their living space, but what's immediately outside their living space, because that's the lifestyle they want. And I'll stop at that.
Well, you really did tee up Roshan to talk about some of the work that you did to activate those spaces. So tell us a little bit about that work. But I would love for you to talk about that work, but I would love to talk about the role that partnerships play when you are not well-resourced to get a lot of that work done.
Yeah, so my name is Rashawn Davis. I own an event agency called Unseen Heroes. And through the pandemic, I started a community development corporation called Culture. And so it's interesting when we talk about it from a standpoint, and I'm just going to bring it up from an economic development standpoint, and talk about things like Art Hop. Like, in Sacramento, that's kind of what we do, right? So we create events in these different spaces that bring people to a neighborhood. And while it seems cool on the outside and it brings thousands of people, during the pandemic, what I really started to see was it is such a vital piece of economic development. It's not just cool. It's actually, 30, 40, 50 vendors who are small businesses that are making money in order to survive, and this is their job, but people use it as entertainment. And that's okay because it creates like the density that we want. But when we're talking about connecting the dots, then you have to look at it from an economic development standpoint. And I didn't really understand that while I was doing the cool stuff, but during the pandemic, it's like, oh, that event that we do creates $3 million for the local people that are on the street. That's not even including, because we didn't have the study for it, to include the businesses that are in the neighborhood that get frequented. So it's like looking at it from a different lens allows for that activation to be a lot more sustainable, but then also bring in a lot of the development and a lot of the other things that we all want to see: housing, people, place, community, all in together and work as one. So I think that's the most important kind of piece when we're talking about activating space.
I'd love to pivot to housing, and Mike, you alluded to some of the challenges that SAC is still having, although I think you guys are probably a little bit more further advanced than we are. And Reza, you've been at it building homes downtown for the last 2 decades. As far as I've heard, our zoning is not the problem. The rents are high, the vacancies are low, there are waiting lists. Every time people ask if people want to live downtown, everyone says yes, when can we have more homes? Why aren't more people joining you?
That's a good question, but I think it might have a simple answer too. So there was a couple things touched on. I'll just touch real quick. We do have a lot of property that just doesn't turn hands. That's one issue. So you sometimes have properties that someone's owned for many, many years, and then it gets passed down, but everybody seems to always be waiting. When can I get more? So loosening property is something I feel like has always been difficult, but that was difficult 24 years ago too. Actually, maybe not as difficult because values were considerably, drastically lower. But, and then aside from that, you can't just put it in that box. We have speculators. So we do have a lot of people that come to Fresno to buy property. They don't really do much with it because they see a downtown that's something's starting to happen, right? See something starting to happen, and values are going to go up. They can flip something. So I've seen a lot of that, especially in the last 10 years or so. But that doesn't help. So it just creates more and more buildings and spaces sitting.
Councilmember, how do we stop the speculation from the city perspective?
So I'll tell you, when I got on the council 5 years ago, we had about 11 exclusive negotiation agreements where we had handed over public property to private developers with the hope that they would develop it. Most of them were more than 10 years long, and they hadn't done anything. Thanks to the California Surplus Act passage, we allowed all those to expire. If it wasn't for the state law, the council would have struggled to say no to their friends and grant more and more extensions. Some of those ended up in lawsuits against me because we wouldn't give extensions. You haven't developed, we're going to put it out to the market, we're going to sell it, somebody's going to move on it. I think the first step is to, stop with the exclusive negotiating agreements and have some very specific benchmarks. The second part, which I try to enjoy a lot more, and I think is more fruitful, is to be helpful in the place that we can actually be helpful. The cost of downtown development, about 30 or 35% is underneath the ground in the space in which the public owns, the city owns. When Reza comes in to develop a housing unit, we tell Reza, hey, since you're here, why don't you fix the sidewalk for the whole block that's been broken for 30 years? Why don't you repave the whole street for a quarter mile? Why don't you replace the 100-year-old pipes and the 200-year-old sewer lines and underground all the utilities that PG&E should have done 40 years ago? And all those off-site costs is actually what makes it a much more difficult project to pencil out. In a perfect world, it would pencil out, but the rents would be $2,500 per unit, which there's no market here for. So from our part, what we try to focus in the dozen new housing projects that we've supported in the last 5 years is, one, provide the property to people who have the ability to actually perform. Two, cover the off-site cost. The state grant would allow us to improve practically all the underground infrastructure. The city now covers all off-site infill development for infill projects. Waive impact fees, waive everything else, and try and manage, because once we give money, and we also, the third thing we do is provide gap financing. If you're short $1 million to make your project pencil out and make it more affordable, we can help there. The challenge, of course, for us is at the moment that we give a developer a penny for any work above ground, prevailing wage kicks in. That adds 30 to 35% additional cost to the whole project. State requirement, it doesn't apply if we use city general funds. But again, we don't have a history of actually investing city general fund dollars into downtown infill development. All we really invest is state and federal funds that trigger prevailing wage.
Reza, the mayor has already committed at least 50 of the 300 million towards underground infrastructure. If you had everything on your infrastructure wish list crossed off, would the banks finance your projects?
Unfortunately, yeah, Mural District got cut right there. So 24 years of working in a particular area, magically the infrastructure is cut. So it actually wouldn't. I'm sure we'll be okay somehow, but I don't think it's coming from that. Infrastructure has killed a lot of things. So can I tell like a quick story? I have a project in construction. It's not that big. It's 28 units. It's 3-story. It's in Mural District. And I shelved that project for 1.5 years. That was actually when Lee Brand was mayor. I couldn't get anything to move forward. They wanted water upsizing, sewer, hydrants, so just the normal laundry list that I've dealt with on project after project. So finally I said, well, I mean, it's 28 units. I can't really spend $1 million on infrastructure. It kills it. So it was shelved until later where I ended up adding some affordable units. There is a lot of people who have a lot of passion, obviously, to want to see things work. But there's only so much when there's multiple heads involved. So I passed it through council. So that's how I got creative with that. So I actually took it through council so that council would vote that the city would pay for the infrastructure. It didn't make a lot of people happy, but it made the project, after 1.5 years of being basically shelved, move forward. And one little quick tidbit, because these are always fun. On another project, Broadway Lofts, I remember being in a meeting. I think some of it is lack of understanding. I was in a meeting with the city and was told, and I said, this doesn't make any sense. You guys, ratepayers, have been paying into this for decades and decades, but you've just neglected to put any money back downtown. It goes everywhere else in Fresno because you guys don't care. And they said, well, can't you finance it? I go, do you understand how building and rent works? Like, finance it, who's going to pay for it? So yes, this infrastructure is awesome, but we need to be really careful, I think, and make sure it's used correctly and to really do things. I've been preaching infrastructure, as you know, for a very long time.
Yeah, thanks, Reza. Roshan, I would love to hear about some of your experiences in getting into housing development in Sacramento and how you've found ways to, as you explained to me, build affordability through design, and ways of keeping people who may not be able to afford the luxury condos in place.
Yeah, so in Sacramento, there's 2 different ways we look at it. We look at it from a home ownership standpoint, and so we have a partnership with the city of Sacramento through the community benefits agreement that Darlene was talking about. And it is giving 25 people a pilot program, $15,000 down on their home. They have to be a first-time home buyer. And then we're doing $2,500 in credit payback as well, and to get them prepared for home ownership. So we're looking at it as like an anti-displacement model as this housing starts to come, because we're teaching people how to be owners in their neighborhoods, right? And then on the housing development side, kind of the same vibe. It's like we've been in this space of creating culture for a long time in Sacramento, but never really in a space of ownership. So we've gotten displaced from 3 different neighborhoods by just creating cool in the neighborhoods, right? And then when it becomes to the tipping point, it's like, you guys got to go somewhere else. And so what we're looking at now is like, how do we own in the places that we love to create in as creatives, right? And so now we're looking at housing, and so to hear like the city's coming in and paying for all of the off-site costs, that's why I looked over. I was like, wow, like that's amazing. There's things that we can learn in Sacramento as well, but there's this thing that I'm starting to understand more and more in a for-profit development, and then just someone who's from the community and just wants to see it shine. There's a difference, it's like the speculation. There are people who are going to come in and build developments that are trying to just maximize the profit. But then there's also folks that are in the community that just want to see something get built. So that's where we come in and we look at it and say, if we just design this differently, then it doesn't have to be this thing where we maximize profit. We just don't have to be greedy in making our neighborhoods better. And who's on board for that? And if you're on board for that, then come on, we're going to figure out how to get this done. And that's kind of like the space that we're looking at right now. And so we just acquired half an acre on one of the corridors that we were first displaced from like 12 years ago. And then we're also going through a PSA with the city of Sacramento to get 4 more parcels on that corridor as well. And now we're looking at housing and saying like, we could build 140 units on one and we can build 75 units on another, but we're gonna make it community owned as well. So we're looking at ways that community can come in and invest and make those costs kind of go down, and partner with the city as well to make that happen.
That's awesome. Ellie, I want to talk to you a little bit about, you got to help us win over the skeptics here, because I feel like for those of us who've been around the block a few times, first it was like, if you build the stadium, then we're going to build the housing and we're going to build the development. And then that happened, and then we didn't see the development happen at the scale that we all wanted it to. And then we heard, okay, well, if you convert Fulton Mall to a street, then we'll start to build, and we'll build the housing, we'll build the development. And so how do we know that with the $300 million going into infrastructure, going into parking structures, how do we know that it's not going to be yet another goalpost that gets moved?
Well, we've always operated, I would say, through the course of what you're talking about, on like taking the highest probability shot that we can with the resources, the situation that we're presented with, right? And I don't think that silver bullet thinking has ever been the right approach. And kind of what I'm hearing that's a common thread, which is so true, is that we need to unlock the potential of each property to maximize its contribution to the revitalization of downtown. And so there's things that come into that in terms of the street infrastructure. So if you're in a mid-block on Fulton Mall, it was very difficult to describe to people how to find you and assure them that the light was on and people were there and where do I park. That gets a lot simpler through having a street, right? So there things like that. The way to think about things like that, though, interventions like that, is how are we unlocking the ability of each property and each property owner and each business owner to maximize what they can do with what they have. And so when I talk about, there's a collective strategy needed to be successful with retail, it's the same idea. It's how can I be part of a district? How can I be part of a collective of occupying more buildings that are more successful together? So what we see, though, and kind of back to what you were asking, Donnie, I would say is like, we have the paradox of the moment that we're in, which I think is a time of change, is that we've got the 65+% vacancy that I'm talking about, but we also have the 15,000 people jamming the sidewalk on at least one night a month. And so the potential is there. What we've seen from mall to street, we've seen a 14x increase in the change is happening because it has been happening.
Please.
I think about it in that way, and just from experience, you have to look at neighborhoods as like they're always in this cyclical most of the times, where there's a height of it and then there's the fall of it. And that's just the cycle of a neighborhood. Maybe some neighborhoods stay higher for a longer time, but there's a cycle to it. And so as we start to look at community development now, we're looking with a 10 to 15 year horizon. And that's how you have to kind of look that far ahead. I know we all want to see it happen tomorrow, but if you look at it and like, okay, this neighborhood, we know when we went in 10 years ago, I've had my storefront for 10 years in a neighborhood called Oak Park in Sacramento. When we opened, or when we went over to the neighborhood, it was a neighborhood my family grew up in, so I had no problem going to the neighborhood. But everybody told me, you're going to Oak Park? You're gonna actually move your business and your family over there? It was this scary thing for people. Well, now, like, Oak Park is the talk of the town, talk of outside of the town, but it took 10 years to develop to that point. You know, so as you start to look at your neighborhoods here, or look at even like around here, like you said, it's only been 5 years and you have all this development. And so what's 5 more years gonna look like? What's another 5 years gonna look like? And that's the investment from a community side that we have to be able to look at it from. It's like, this is a long game. It's been happening a long time, and it will continue to happen a long time.
You know, I tend to be the council member that reads everything and pulls every item for discussion from the consent agenda. 5 years ago, I noticed a little item on the consent where we had an agreement to provide water and sewer to a church that wasn't within our city or our service area. And I found that intriguing, so I read up on it, asked questions. Come to find out, the city had bonded out a few $1 million to extend water and sewer service to this church in the most northeast part of our community, with the rationale that when more customers come, they would help pay off the bond. So the city bonds out in the utility department funds to put the water and sewer lines. A subdivision pops up, we have more users, therefore there's more users paying into the system and paying back the bond. That's the same rationale we use for all these suburb developments around the fringe of the city. The city put the water and sewer lines, not the developers. The city upfronted all of that cost. In the most recent proposal for Southeast Fresno, that cost at the bare minimum is $700 million, at the height is $1.5 billion. So then I asked them, well, I have a lot of empty parcels in Tower and in downtown that currently have nobody living there. Why am I making Reza pay the full cost for the infrastructure going? If the city puts it in, then we'll have 27 new ratepayers that will pay that obligation back. So it was just simply recognizing the business model that had worked for spa development and flipping and saying it also works for infill development, so why aren't we using it? And that's the part that I've learned is it's not that difficult. It's simply being prepared and being present and making the articulate argument that's been made for the development of sprawl in the city. And kudos to Sacramento. In 2022, you guys killed Measure A. In 2022, we killed Measure C on the same rationale. More freeways, more sprawl. It's the huge subsidy that only distracts from investing in current residents for the benefit of future residents.
That's a great set. Oh, Elliot, do you want to jump in on that first?
Well, not necessarily specifically, but I just kind of want to make the case, I guess, that everything that we're talking about is part of an ecosystem for development, for, let's say, inclusive development. And so having the infrastructure in place is important. Having the zoning code in place that aligns with your goals as a community is important. Having the developer capacity, the right kind of developers who are going to develop, is important. And then there are pieces that come in where, you know, thinking about like community solutions, community-driven development, where, and here I'm as much speaking from being on the board of Access Plus Capital, a CDFI lender for 6 years, is how do we enable more people in our community, and let's say they've been part of the community that's been here and resilient through lots of challenging times? How do we create the capacity for more of our community to be part of doing the development? Because certainly we could use more people off the sidelines and part of this, right? And there's an enabling environment component there too about access to capital and support for pre-development. And you'll find a bank to lend on a project if you bring approved plans. But what does it take to get to approved plans?
Yeah, Mike.
Well, I want to build on that. We saw some startling statistics today about your city. They're not really dissimilar to Sacramento, but they were more concerning. When you look at so you see the slideshow about how growth was focused on the city center until about the end of World War II, and then it started moving out and the downtown disappeared. Part of it got demolished. That was a trend that true all over the country, by the way. But at the same time, there was a concentration of poverty in and around your central area. And the Community Foundation has very good recent data that are just startling about the concentration of poverty. The Air Resources Board has environmental data that are startling about the environmental issues around the central area. And then there were socioeconomic data about the isolation of the different ethnicities in your city. And so I think it's really important as you think about the future of the downtown that you consciously think about how that is going to improve those conditions. Because the data are very clear and common sense just tells you if you have a high percentage of poverty in your area and if your people are divided by ethnicity and economic status, it slows your growth rate. It has an absolute effect on how vibrant your economy can become. The data around the country are crystal clear on that. And so I would like you to see you we're trying to do this in Sacramento, hopefully that was clear from Doreen's slide presentation, to use this issue of whatever phrase you want to use, equitable development, social equity, inclusive growth, consciously to guide everything that you're doing in your community to try to move the needle in the right direction on those fundamental issues. And so you have been incredibly successful over the last decade or so at attracting outside money. The federal government has spent a lot of money here, foundations have, continue. You've been enormously successful with Governor Newsom and the state of California and have north of $250 million of money coming into your downtown in the next few years. And I would just recommend that you be 2 or 3 things about those projects, that you be conscious that those projects somehow are going to be designed in a way that directly or indirectly moves the needle in the right direction for the people that live around here and these social equity issues. I would like to see you look at the set of projects that will be funded by that huge amount of money as how they interconnect with each other. Because if it's just a series of one-off, and it's clear some of that thinking is going on. We heard some of this from Elliot today in the tour he gave us. It's clear some of this thinking is going on. I'm not trying to imply otherwise. But I'm saying be explicit about it. How do the infrastructure investments, the housing investments, the parking investments work as a set? And then finally, and especially, to be very explicit about what benefits you want from your high-speed rail system once it is connected. I hear, honestly, a lot of sort of general excitement as there's lots of money spent to do it, so there's some construction jobs, obviously, that come, and something that new and innovative and at least nation leading in our country, must be bringing good things. But I don't hear a specific conversation about, well, but what? What is going to come from that? And I am not an expert in this. I am a planner, and I can imagine, I would at least have a theory, that once the whole system is connected to the Bay Area and Los Angeles, that those speeds are so fast from here to those two world-class economic centers, and it's so difficult to get around those centers if you live there. If you get in your car and you try to get from one end of LA to another, or one end of the Bay Area or another, it'll take you much longer than to get in a train in downtown Fresno and be at a business meeting in downtown Los Angeles. And so I think you have an opportunity to attract some economic growth from firms in those two vibrant areas, vibrant economies, who need to expand, and either it's too costly there or they're simply out of land to come here, bring jobs that generate wealth, that then create the incomes that you can bring in the kind of housing you want, et cetera.
Councilmember, you're in the room often when conversations about how to be strategic with this money from the state are happening.
I'm mostly pissed off in those rooms, for the record. I'm the angry guy in the room saying, what the hell were you thinking?
So what's the thinking on the vision casting? Like, let us in on the process a little bit. Spill some tea.
First, let me tell you kind of the reality on the ground. The best hope we have for high-speed rail is that it undoes what the freeway and the rail system did to Fresno, which was divide neighborhoods and segregate the city and tear down really good working class neighborhoods. So that's why we fought with them, and that was one of my pissed off meetings, for a station that had two openings, one in Chinatown and one in downtown. Second argument was with the administration, put all the public transportation in downtown only. Then what's the rationale for people going to Chinatown if there's no access point there? The third part was, how do we connect the rural transit system to the downtown station and to the city's public transportation system? We don't have a record of getting along with our county neighbors. We have two distinct different visions for our community. So in Chinatown, the vast majority of the properties that you saw are vacant, also contaminated. At the height of that prosperity was heavy industrial, extremely contaminating operations. So I have about 300 brownfields in the city. Of those, about 250 are my district. Of those, half of them are in that region. So every parcel that we see that's vacant is vacant for a reason. It costs $1 or $2 million to just clean up and decontaminate before you can build something on. Our approach has been to take every property that the public owns and make it into high-density housing, what we would call a mixed income housing. We can't do concentration of affordable only. That doesn't generate discretionary income that retailers need to be attracted into a corridor. Mixed income would allow folks to hopefully not be pushed out, but remain there. It allows new folks to come in, and then allow the private developers to bring in the sole market rate. They can take the risk, they can make the investment. But in terms of plans, the corridor that we're talking about is Tulare, Van Ness, Ventura, and F Street. Our plans call for us to proactively upgrade all the underground infrastructure, water, sewer, streets. That's a significant amount of the money.
Underground streets?
No, but the streets too. Also to build probably 2 parking garages and to build some housing. There's a debate that still hasn't been concluded. Do we as a city build a 7-story parking garage somewhere in some corner and hope that serves the housing that develops around it? Or do we give the market money towards a project and require them to build parking within each of these development housing projects like you see? How do we integrate parking? The other part of it is green space. We have money for green space. Do we do linear parks? Do we do great streetscapes? Do we do a big 10-acre park or 20-acre park in the core of downtown? And how do we build around the station itself? The station won't have retail inside. The thinking is, if you build retail inside the station, there's no reason for people to come out of the station. So we want to force folks to walk into the downtown sector, into the Chinatown sector, and feed that retail businesses.
At what point is the public going to be able to be a part of that process and making those decisions?
Well, that's where the public will be upset. And here's why. There's absolutely a place for public process and public engagement. But there's also reality of we have deadlines. And the governor has been very clear, if you don't spend the first 50, you're not going to get a shot at the 200 remaining. And the 50, the way the legislature works, as you know, there's a budget deficit now at the state. Every dollar that was promised but isn't in our account is going to get reprioritized in this budget negotiations. So we have to demonstrate to the state that we're spending the money immediately. So the first 50 million for infrastructure will come to a council as early as June. Of course, there'll be public debate and discussion at the council, but don't anticipate a year worth of community meetings or stakeholder meetings to debate where we lie the lines. And the reason for that is we know that all these lines here are 150 years old. When we built that baseball stadium, in the first 10 years, all the lines underneath the stadium blew up because they never got replaced when they built the stadium. So we know exactly what needs to be done. So the first phase of the project will simply be water and sewer lines in the major quarters where they currently exist, and maybe some minor relocation. The second phase, which I call the next 200 million, that will be the bigger debate is where do we go next? And where do we build garages, and where do we build housing, and where do we build green space? And I think that's where the public is really going to be engaged in that process.
Mike, I want to go back to a point that you sort of danced around a little bit a few minutes ago around the regional context. And so you may have heard in some of the conversations you were in earlier today about our very rapidly growing region. I think Clovis surpassed Fresno last year in terms of the total number of homes that are being built every year. Unincorporated Madera County is on a quick track to do that as well. And it sort of feels like an arms race right now between cities on who can build the most suburban tracts the fastest. So how do we think about that context, and how does that influence whether we can have a successful downtown when so much housing and retail capacity is being built other places?
Well, on both the jobs and the housing front, there's definitely a important regional context to that dynamic, because economies happen at a regional scale. They don't happen in downtowns of individual cities. They have housing markets, and economies happen at a regional scale. And there is not unlimited demand for either jobs of any type or housing at a regional scale. Over a certain amount of time, depending on your growth rate, there's a certain amount of demand. And so the percentage of the market of that regional demand that you can capture in your downtown and in your city generally absolutely is an important part of the equation. The good news, I haven't seen local data, but I've seen enough of these data around the state of California and around the country that I'm almost positive that it's true here. I don't know where the ceiling is, but I would bet you everything I've learned in way too many decades of urban planning now, that there is substantial unmet demand for housing in your downtown. If you can supply it, they will come. I don't know what the upper limit of that is. I will tell you, if you've got 75,000 units of zoned capacity, if you had 5,000 more housing units in your downtown today, this would be a different place. 5,000 units would do it. And so it is important if the people in charge of land use entitlements continue to improve entitlements on the edge, it's going to hurt your ability to succeed in the downtown. It's just that simple.
Reza, in the development community, why haven't your colleagues joined you in doing more of this work beyond infrastructure?
Right. Other builders, basically, right? Yeah. I think it's probably kind of simple. I think Fresno, when you look at development and builders in Fresno, there's people have been kind of doing the same thing for a very long time, right? And to restructure or kind of go out of your toolbox, I guess, right, is kind of different. And then, so that's one thing. I think if it was more lucrative to build downtown, it comes down to also that, right?
But the rents downtown, I mean, Dan was showing me some data that per square foot, downtown rents are higher than Woodward Park.
Right, but the costs are also higher. So you've got, like you guys were talking about, not just with the infrastructure, the hurdles, the red tape, the constant red tape, but it's brain damage. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times over the couple decades that I've questioned myself and go, why don't you just do something really cool on the other side of town? But I'm just not passionate about it. I mean, the only thing I've done, which I love this, north of Shaw, is Craycroft, because it was historic and they were going to tear it down, so I bought it. I haven't done anything north of Fig Garden. But that's just because that's my personality. I don't know how many people we have that just really want to do urban stuff, that look at it from the financial part as a long game. I mean, my first project, I was 25 years old working 3 jobs. I wasn't worried about supporting a family, and I didn't have a family, right? So I think downtown you have to look at it as a long game, if that's the career path you want to take. And also I think it's just difficult to build downtown. It's not easy compared to other parts.
If I may add to that, I spent a lot of time with developers and the pro formas. Fresno is surrounded by farmers. The farmers retire, their kids don't want to farm anymore, so they sell to, suburb development. A single family home gets you a 30% return on investment when you sell the house. A downtown housing project, you might get 4%. So you have a whole generation of folks making 30% on the fringes of Fresno. You can develop at 1,000 acres at a time. Master develop, get all the tract mats approved. It'll take you 20 or 30 years to fully build out that. For 20, 30 years, Copper River was approved 25 years ago. It's only built out at 65% right now, after 25 years. That cow keeps on giving you milk for decades at a 30% return on investment. Here, you're getting 4%. And you got to be the owner, the landlord. Over there, you're just selling. You get your profit margin, you move on. And Reza is absolutely, it's true. It is extremely much harder in a downtown development. You have every bureaucracy giving you a headache. Don't get me started on the rail system right away. PG&E, AT&T, all the undergrounding and the relocation. Out there, you're laying everything out new for the first time. It's just bare land. So it's easier, it's more profitable. It is the evolution of farm families getting out of farming and going to housing development. Some of the most prominent ag families in our city's history are now housing developer families.
Please, Reza, jump in.
I think you
Give
nailed
us some
that.
optimism.
Yeah, I think you nailed that. That was perfect. There was one thing I missed is financing. Has always been really difficult downtown. It's easier now. It's still really difficult downtown. So that is another piece I think that a lot of people just don't want to deal with.
And why is it the banks that are just skeptical, or what are the hiccups on the financing?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, but I also think appraisals are very difficult. I'll give you an example. The one in construction right now, it's 28 units. It appraised for the construction loan at about 50%. So they would only, obviously they're going to loan a lot less. Or where the appraisal was, it ended up that they loaned about 50% of what I needed. So I told the bank, I said, because I do development, acquisition, the plans. I'm a one-man band. I build it myself. There is no superintendent, and I do the books too. So I told them, I said, look, I'm building. This is my cost. If someone can build it for that, give me a name. I'll have them build it for me. So that is a big issue, is appraisals and banking, and I think a lot of banks' attitudes towards it.
Roshan, I would love to get some optimism from you. We need some optimism. How can you?
Yes.
How
No,
can you-
it's interesting because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, like, we talk about all of these high level things, right? And it's good to be at the high level, but like at the grassroots level, I want everybody to raise their hand when I ask this question. If does anybody drink beer? Raise your hand. Okay. Does anybody drink? Keep your hands up. Does anybody drink wine? I knew I'd get some people. Does anybody drink water? Can I get a water? Everybody should raise their hand right now. If we just literally walked out of this space and went and purchased a beer, purchased a water, purchased a wine, we're talking about instant economic development, which then creates more of what's happening, and it just supports it. And I think that's the lens that you have to kind of come at it with, is like, the more that you support small businesses, entrepreneurs, I want to go to the taco shop that's right here. Last time I came to Fresno, the taco shop right across the street was amazing. It's like when we're able to do that in downtown or in our neighborhoods, and we actually don't spend our money in Amazon and things like that, it creates more and more of this economic development. It supports the strength of like the entrepreneurs, which then brings more entrepreneurs in, which inspires more, and it builds from the bottom up. And then we look at the 10-year horizon and look at the housing and all of that coming in, and hopefully we meet in the middle somewhere, but there's a lot of power just in this room in the economic development standpoint if you just spend your money locally, Mm-hmm. So that's always the way that I come at it. I'm a business owner as well, so I'm like, right. Yeah, come frequent the store, because the store that I have, when you spend your money here, I stay open,
Elliot, I want to hear a little bit from you. I know that DFP, you guys have been doing a lot of work to build up the next generation of downtown enthusiasts through the Downtown Academy. How are you guys doing work to kind of make Fresnans be the ones that we're waiting for?
Well, yes, great plug for the Downtown Academy, which is relaunching, and we're accepting applications through the end of May. And you can go to our website, downtownfresno.org, and find out more. We've had 10 cohorts go through of the Downtown Academy over the years, a total of about 300 people. And a lot of those folks, maybe come into the Downtown Academy as young professionals working downtown and just stay committed to downtown through, a job change or 2 or 3, and are still involved, whether that's as volunteers, as emissaries. I won't use the word ambassadors because we've got that word used for a certain thing, but they are, right? They're talking to people in their circles all around town about downtown and what they see, right? And so the little bit of gear change that we're making now for class 11 is that it's more, I think in 1 through 10, there was kind of learning to see as a business owner, learning to think as a customer, thinking about downtown from different perspectives. With the investment in infrastructure and with high-speed rail moving along and with lots of things progressing, the shift that we're making with class 11 is to give a little bit of that deeper behind-the-scenes perspective about development, about infrastructure, about how the change process happens, how people can be part of that. And I think that it's all part of what we're talking about in terms of democratizing development and encouraging more people to be part of what's going on.
Councilmember, what's the city's role in activating and allowing people to be the ones that we're waiting for downtown?
Move on. Have all us old farts just move on. Make way for young people. You know, I'll tell you, when I got on the council, the average age on the council was 60. 5 years later, at 45, I'm the second oldest. Prior to getting on the council, only one council member would be in downtown at the nearby hotel. Now, 6 of the 7 council members know RHOB, they know Modernist, they know the Tioga. They understand it, they live it.
You don't go together, right?
Yes.
Because that's a Brown Act violation.
No, not together. But they understand the vitality. We're no longer, my first in the council, we debated for months e-scooters. The council member said, I don't have a purpose for it, why am I going to allow it in the city? So the shift has occurred, but most importantly, beyond the age difference, the generational difference, is we've also acknowledged the lessons that sprawl is financially unsustainable. We're going on the 3rd year of not having a joint tax sharing agreement with the county because we recognize that getting 38 cents out of every dollar for new development bankrupts the city. We literally are going to go bankrupt if we continue to grow the fringes because we cannot afford even to build those communities a fire station, much less a police substation, and provide road and park services to them that far away. So the council as a whole has said, we're not going to continue doing the same old thing expecting a different result. We're going to invest. As Rez indicated, every housing project that we've launched in the last 5 years has been initiated by the council, not the administration. We're the ones to initiate the housing projects on Blackstone, on Kings Canyon, on Parkway, in downtown. Because we recognize that you can't get infill by just wishing for it. You have to actually invest in doing it. So the best I hope for, Danielle, is that the next generation of leaders that will continue to be younger will be coming from neighborhoods like this that know what a Tower neighborhood feels like, what a downtown neighborhood feels like, what a big city feels like. And you know, downtown's competition is not the suburbs. We're not going to succeed in downtown by convincing people from the suburbs to come to downtown or live here. Our goal is to be a place where young folks can come, live, work, and play here. And if later they want to have a family and they want a big backyard, then there's a place for them to go to. But the real threat to us that the suburbs pose is for every new suburb that we approve, it's less general fund money than we ever have to invest in the infill development. And fundamentally, it is current residents who've been here for 50 years, subsidizing future residents, and mostly from out of town, who find our market way more affordable than Sacramento or the Bay Area.
Closing statement time, you get 30 seconds. What conversation do you hope we're having in 5 years? Let's start with you, Roshan.
I think connection. You know, as long as you guys understand the connection in the community that you have now, in 5 years, you'll be completely in a different space.
Mike, parting words of wisdom.
How wonderful it's been that although you've taken down many wonderful buildings, you have a number of spectacular buildings still in your downtown. A planner would say great bones. And how wonderfully they've been repopulated, some of them repurposed from office to housing, and how vibrant your downtown is.
Of all the things to pick, well, we've talked about live, work, and play, and we've talked a lot about live and play, and less about work. But it's a key part of the ecosystem is what's the role of downtown in the region's economy, which means it's a job center, it's a center for industry, and as we think about our region, the Valley, transitioning its economy up the value chain and diversifying into exports that are more knowledge-driven, downtown's got to be the place where that happens. And so I'm excited, and hopefully in 5 years or sooner, we've got things to talk about that really draw on the assets that we have. This building upstairs, for example, being one of them, people who are here. And more presence for university research, more presence of entrepreneurs who are creating products, businesses together in a place that only downtown can help nurture.
I hope that we're we would see, let's say, a handful more historic buildings rehab, because 5 years goes quick, and maybe a few hundred more units of housing, quite a few. I think the small business aspect is really exponentially growing pretty fast these last handful of years, so I hope we see quite a bit more of that. I hope we see lots of small steps that continue to happen.
I'm hoping the next council member for this area is going to be handling a ton of complaints over parking. Because like the Cultural Arts District, when you actually bring people downtown, you start fighting over parking. When are the meters on? When are they off? Why don't you waive my parking fees? Why don't you give me free parking? That would be a signal that we have a lot more people here. Secondly, that we're fighting over the level of noise. Too many concerts, too many events, I can't sleep at night, you know, you need to lower it down. And the third part, and most critical, I think, is the gentrification of small businesses that don't own their building. And I believe that that is the single largest Achilles heel and the most difficult conversation we're gonna have to engage in on if we, as a public, invested all this infrastructure that made your building far more valuable, you shouldn't be tripling the rent on your tenant who successfully has been carrying this area on their own for a decade. And that's, I hope, is a conversation we're debating in the next 5 years, and that my replacement is able to handle that conversation. Because God knows we as a city have been scared to talk about rent control on the residential side. But if we don't deal with something on the cost of rent on the commercial and retail side, we will completely undermine the efforts to revitalize our city.
Thank you, Councilmember. I want to give a huge round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Quick shout outs to Pablo with the camera. He's with Team Fresnoland, Diego and Alexa in the hallway, all with Team Fresnoland. Thank you all for production. Also shout out to Joe Schilling from the Urban Institute for all of his work. Artie Padilla with the Central Valley Community Foundation for sponsoring this event, along with the Kresge Foundation. So thank you all, and just thank you all for being here. We're really glad to have you, and hope you can attend more Fresnoland Futures in the future.
Thank you, Danielle, for sucking us all into this conversation.